Welcome back, Samir, to the World XP podcast. Salman, welcome for the first time. Super excited to have you both here. This kind of stems off the back of our my last episode with Samir regarding his book around free will and determinism and those sorts of things. Do you guys want Samir? Why don't you do your elevator pitch first, since the people are more familiar with you, and then Salman will get to you, and then the question from the last guest, and then we'll hop right into the 40-year discussion, as it were.
Yes, it is a 40-year discussion. In fact, it started 40 years ago, almost to the month, on Yonge Street in Toronto. Yes, but anyway, I'm a physicist by training. Before that, I was an electrical engineer. Salman and I got our degrees together in electrical engineering. Before I went off and did physics. After that, I became a trader. Now I run a small hedge fund. And in my spare time, I wrote a book called The Science of Free Will. And the book, The Science of Free Will, goes into all kinds of topics, including whether bees have emotions, why traffic sucks, why Nobel Prize winning economists don't understand tax policy, and the nature of God. And all of these things are relevant to physics and determinism and free will. And so that's what the book is about. That's what we're talking about today.
Very nice. Salman?
As I'm an electrical engineer by training, got interested in probability theory, but rather than working as an engineer, decided to join Wall Street. And after a career doing almost every loan type in terms of acquiring loans for Goldman Sachs, for 12 years, I focused on commercial real estate assets and now have built a combination that takes that probability theory approach to actually sourcing. So we have a pretty fintechy model on how we source our deals, and then combine that with a very top-down analytical process to take in the best of what we source. Because we source through a very wide system, we see a lot of deal flow, so we can be very picky on what we actually invest in. So it's a quasi hedge fund structure as well. I've been doing this particular iteration for 14 years.
Very nice. So the question from the last guest, and I hesitated, Samir, based on our other discussion that we're going to have in the near future about saving it for this one, but I'll ask it here now, which is, what reason or cause do you have for optimism for the future of America / the world? And I'll start with you, Samir.
You want me to start? Okay. So the reason for optimism is that this is still one of the few countries, the UK is the other one, where people from all over the world are always welcome. And there's no particular reason for you to feel unwelcome in the United States. I think everybody is welcome. That's the first thing. The second thing is, because everybody is welcome, it's definitely the case that a lot of extremely smart people would like to be here. And as long as the United States is constantly attracting the best talent in the world, it suggests to me that its long-term future is relatively secure. Add to that we still have, despite the depredations, the world's best university system, by far, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of strengths. Not to mention, we are still the richest and most powerful country in the history of the world by a gigantic margin. And I forget who said this, there's a lot of ruination in a nation. I think we're good.
All right.
Long term, I think we're fine.
And for you, Salman?
I'm more cautiously optimistic than just because I do think that some of the same things that make it great are now being eroded. So if we are deporting PhD level candidates for no reason, and canceling student visas, if I am a very bright person in India or even in Europe, why would I come here? And over time, that advantage hopefully does not get eroded to a point where we do not attract the talent. But right now it's true. Look, the talent from the rest of the world likes to come here. You can build a life here. The constraints are relatively limited. There isn't a caste system of nobility or whatever you might have, which Samir's example was Britain. You clearly have a caste system of the old nobility, the aristocracy, which you don't have in the United States. somebody working hard and working for themselves can actually rise to the top here, and you have numerous examples of that. I think that some of the things that we do as a nation, and you have to put it in historical context, is we do try and destroy to recreate. So that is a strength of the country as well, is that it doesn't really believe in any old paradigms. It's constantly reshaping paradigms, and hopefully out of this process we'll get a better paradigm that's somewhere a little bit towards the center, right? I mean, I think that the extreme of anything is bad. I think that, spending so much time and effort to figure out, uh, you know, whether it's fair or not for the 1% of athletes that are transgender to compete in sports was just an uh, enormous misuse of resources, in my opinion, right? I mean, like it's just a question of how does that affect the price of tea in China? Like, I mean, as the saying goes, right? I mean, and or the price of groceries in a family's shopping bag. It doesn't. And if attention gets swept to those types of issues, everybody loses. And hopefully we get to a more common sense approach to life, and we retain our ability to to attract the brightest and the best from everywhere, and create a system where, you know, a meritocratic system that allows people to shine.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that's very well
The
put.
one thing I would add to that is that no, in not many places in the world is welcome stranger actually meant. This is one of the few places where if somebody says welcome stranger, they actually mean welcome stranger. It doesn't mean I'm going to about to rob you, shoot you, you know, take the shirt off your back or whatever. It's a big thing.
Hmm. So, Salman, you mentioned erosion, and I think some people would argue that part of the erosion of culture might have to do with a more secular society or a lack of belief in either religion or God. So I'll open it up to you first, and the reason for this also, Samir, sorry, you got a whole episode by yourself to state your case. So,
Absolutely.
so
That's totally fair.
go ahead, Salman.
I mean, look, I'd say that, in my opinion, religion tends to be personal, right? So it is a belief system. It is, if you go through, um, it's hard to prove, and therefore it's called a belief, right? So if you could believe it, it would not be a belief. It would be a mathematical axiom. So having said that, you examine sort of perceptual evidence over time. eh, all the people that we know who were sort of the prophets or the gurus, whatever you want to call them, of any religion, they all sort of looked inwards, right? Buddha sat in a retreat for 40 days, um, and came up with his concept of divinity. Muhammad would go into a cave for nights on end before he sort of found God. Um, Moses was a prince of Egypt and went into the desert and found God ultimately, and then led his people. Um, so I can go on and on and on, but it is almost like there is and there is something in us, which is, if you read any religion in some sort of depth, there is something in us which is one with reality, and the reality being a God or a superior being. And if there's a concept in in I mean, there's a very famous poem, verse from a poem from one of the what I believe to be one of the best philosophers in India. He's a poet. I mean, but some of the things he says are really really profound. He said, when I was not, I mean, I'll translate it and bugger it, because I mean it's a translation of an Urdu
Hmm.
verse. When I was not what was, when I won't be what will be, existence destroyed me. If I was not, what would I be? Which is that when I was not, when you didn't exist, you were one with this entity that I believe exists. And when I will not be as a conscious being, I will be at one with that entity. And in the meantime, our perception of that entity is limited by our own consciousness. And as we get closer to that entity, we you can have variant, in Samir's case, no belief. In my case, reasonably strong belief that superior entity does exist.
I want to add to that your kind of statement about there some seems to be something within that is pulling to a higher being, and I think when as a society or when somebody loses that sight of religion, that is filled by other things, whether it's gambling or drugs, or even in some cases you get in like an ideological sort of worship. And so I wanted to add that piece that I agree, but I wanted to add that part in as well, just to, and then Samir, Samir, your basically state, well, I'll let you describe it, and then I think we'll be off to the races.
So my statement is that I actually don't disagree with a lot of what Salman just said. But my point is only not that brains don't have pattern recognition engines that try to find patterns and meaning in everything, even when there may not be any, but that there's no evidence for any of these constructs that our brains create. So the only evidence we have of anything is that, as I say in my book, we're made of atoms. And those atoms are following physical laws, and we know the physical laws that those atoms are following. So if we know the physical laws of the stuff that we are made of, then I find it very confusing to posit another creator type, unless the creator type is one that essentially created and stepped back and had no further role in the proceedings. Now, if that's the case, I don't have a problem with that. But that seems to me to be a superfluous assumption. I don't see why I need to make it, since it doesn't add anything, as I said, to the proceedings. So whether somebody created the universe or the universe just always existed, or it came out of another universe or whatever it is, there's lots of ways of thinking about it. So what? It's following physical laws. So at that point, my statement is, who cares if there's a creator if the creator has nothing to do with the world? Because we can get into this afterwards. If the creator does have something to do with the world on an ongoing basis, it's pretty clear we have no free will of any kind.
Okay, I've got a couple thoughts on that. First is that the who cares portion, I think that's where you get into like the societal thing of religion, in which where does the moral framework, right? There's some kind of innate, like we all could look at a situation independently of culture, religion, upbringing, and if you give us some sort of situation like moral quandary, I think generally speaking, a lot of people would say like, okay, yeah, we shouldn't like rob this guy's house, but if that person needs to feed his family, then we can see the argument. Like, there's this whole like innate sort of sense of justness, and I think as well. So to go back to some on your one of your points is like that just seems to be within people, and so if one, that's a way to explain where that comes from, and then secondarily, if the the teachings, at least from my understanding of Christianity, leave it to believe that free will would exist in practice, like in your book states, but that if the creator is still intervening, we see things like miracles and other sorts of things. So how do you put those two together, like the miracle side with, well, if they're still involved, then we don't really have free will. How do you mesh the two?
Is that for me or for Salman?
Yeah, for you, Samir.
So here's the problem. We have free will in practice, as I call it, because even though the laws of physics are deterministic, we cannot predict what the outcome of those laws is going to be. So in other words, I don't know what I'm going to do until I do it. Or to put it another way, you're not going to know what your life is until you've lived it, despite the fact that the outcome of your life is predetermined by the laws of physics, just like the outcome of the universe is. Now, however, because you can't know the future, you have to live it, and that's your free will. Here's the problem. If in fact there is a creator that does intervene in the world, My favorite example is that the creator could, for example, take all the air from on top of the Sahara on day one and put it back on day two, just to say that I did a miracle. Then, in fact, the laws of physics do not exist. They do not exist by definition, because the whole point of the laws of physics is that they're true always and at all times. So if the laws of physics do not exist, then that means that everything that happens in the world is the result of some action of the creator. And in that case, you don't even have free will under the laws of physics. You just don't have any free will at all.
I'm not, one doesn't necessarily follow from the other, right? Because what there's in your, and I'm a little bit removed from understanding quantum physics, so I'm a little I'm at somewhat of a deficit. But like that, this is my point, right? Um, Schrodinger's equation doesn't say that there's a time continuum. It
Wait,
says
say it again. What?
your point was that quantum theory in your book doesn't have an arrow of time, but we live in an arrow of time.
Yes, which comes from entropy. Yes.
It's equally possible to go backwards and forwards. So I mean and again another philosopher who actually grew up at about the same time in Germany. I mean, there's Iqbal, right? I mean, you read his books, and they're all about trying to explain quantum physics and God. And although now quantum physics has moved beyond because he was in the 1920s. But his point is, look, time is God, right? I mean, time has been imposed on us, and time, what we do with that time that has been imposed on us, which isn't subject, which this superior entity is not subject to. And if you read any of the at least the Abrahamic texts, and I haven't read the Hindu texts, but if you read any of the Abrahamic texts, they all talk about God being from the beginning to the end at any time in between. So that's sort of like the time concept of God being above our time life continuum and defining life as he, I mean, giving us latitude, where Newton law applies in your construct under most circumstances until we get to certain points in quantum physics where and certain energy levels of particles where Newton's laws stop applying, and you've got other laws that apply, and we get to the event horizon in the black hole where most laws break down. So I think that the issue of a superior being having determining everything is not necessarily true. It's almost like, and I'm mixing different religions, but I tend to be a fairly egalitarian chooser of what I believe. Uh, the Maya concept in Hinduism, right? I'm sure you're familiar with it. Like everything is kind of an illusion, right? I mean, we don't know what ultimate reality is, and that is unknowable. So let's try and find and get closer to the ultimate reality, because surprisingly, even Hinduism, even with its 10,000 gods, is monotheistic, because the ultimate power is some entity that you cannot perceive. So
Yes, but that doesn't explain the problem, though.
I don't
Okay,
agree with you,
so
but
Samir, can you maybe more clearly define the problem as you see it? Because the way that you defined it before someone replied, I also was in the camp of like, okay, I don't follow, like, why can't they both be true?
The reason they can't both be true is that the laws of physics are deterministic. What that means is that the state of the universe at time x determines the state of the universe at time y. Fully determines. If you now say that there's an entity that can come in and change the state of the universe between these two times, then that means that the laws of physics did not apply between those two times. And that means the laws of physics actually don't exist.
no, but you're in quantum theory, all states of the universe can exist, right? Until one state becomes
All possible states of the universe can
okay,
exist.
okay. So there isn't to say that that there are various possible states, and the possible state that becomes reality is one that we have free will over. But ultimately, if we don't choose that state, and I understand we can never perceive the other state because it's branched off, but but that state would lead to a different universe, a different reality for us, and therefore different consequences. So I think
That doesn't solve the problem.
Okay, so here, let me throw this at you. Often in when reading the Bible or doing Bible study, at least in my experience, there's metaphorical truth versus literal truth. So you can have the laws of physics be the laws of physics, but like for example, if you make like a train set and it's your little world, the laws of physics exist until you decide that you want to flick a tree over because it doesn't mean there's wind, but you
No, the
decided.
laws of physics still exist because
Okay,
you're flicking the tree over
but
is that.
zoom out though, right? I understand that like literally, if I flick the tree over, that I'm acting upon the laws of physics. But from the
Yes,
people in your little train village, like that's not a giant finger coming out of the sky and flicking a tree doesn't really compute in their scientific world,
correct.
right? So like, but
Sure.
but but you they can still have the people in the little train village can still have their laws of physics as they've determined them as such, and then that action can still exist.
Well,
No?
no, because whatever laws they write down are never going to be able to accommodate that finger coming in and flicking something.
Right.
That's exactly my point.
But isn't that where the existence of a creator would? There's lots of things. Is there not lots of things in physics where there's dark matter or other stuff that
No,
it can't be
the
explained?
no, not no. The physics of biology is fully known. The physics of biology is chemistry. I mean, sorry, the basis of biology is chemistry. And the
Right.
physics of chemistry is already known. It's been known for almost 100 years at this point.
But there are
There is
there are
nothing in
states
that.
there are
What's that?
states there are states in like if in there's like other realities that like we don't know like in the quantum field theory it's like if this version of me chooses one thing and that version of me chooses another thing, but how can I say in another version of the world that that doesn't exist?
Because the question you have to ask yourself is, are you able to affect those outcomes? And the answer is no. So think of the following. Set up any experimental apparatus you wish in New York, and then set up the same experimental apparatus in London, and define any physics experiment you want to do. Anyone. As quantum as you wish, with as much probability in the quantum mechanics as you want. Now run the experiment in both places, you will get the exact same result every single time.
Yes.
That's impossible to explain any other way other than to say that the laws of physics that are creating that experiment are deterministic.
I understand your example, but it doesn't. Maybe I don't know. So, Saman, do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
now look, I mean, you're gonna get into a. I think that the ultimate belief that all physics as it needs to be has already been determined is Samir's religion, right? So you're
No,
not.
no, no, for biology. For biology, I was very careful. The physics of biology is known,
Yeah, no,
not the physics of
I'm
everything.
not so sure because there are like I mean, look, and you will say, did you see it? But there are people who saw this, right? I mean, so the concept of annihilation and becoming one with the maker. I mean, there's these stories about these mystics who started saying, "I am God," and they were killed, saying that this is blasphemy, and then every part of their body was still saying that. So how do you define those? I mean, like look, there is evidence and Catholics believes in miracles, so there is evidence, I mean historical evidence, I haven't seen it, where there's things happen that are not quite deterministic.
That wouldn't be considered scientific evidence because it's not replicable. So
Well,
if you want,
that's what a miracle is, though.
but the problem with a miracle is that if it isn't replicable, then it's not telling you anything about whether or not the underlying laws are valid or invalid.
But okay.
It's an error for the same reason of computational irreducibility that we discussed in the last podcast.
Hmm.
It is an error to expect that even though the laws are deterministic, you can predict everything from them. You can't. That's in fact the nature of free will, as I said. So what you guys are asking, in my opinion, is a category error. You're asking for an explanation of essentially everything derived from the laws. That isn't possible simply because you can't calculate everything. What is possible is to know that the laws exist And what is also possible is to know that everything that we see in the world today is not inconsistent with those laws. Now, if people find that extremely unsatisfying, what do you mean not inconsistent with? But that's really all you can ever say with science. X is not inconsistent with Y. And so the scientific position as a general rule, which again most people find incredibly dissatisfying, is if it's not inconsistent with the laws of science, physics, whatever it is, scientists don't see any reason to change their minds about anything. But the instant you show them something that is inconsistent, that's when they're going to start to focus on it and say, okay. And generally speaking, to show something that's inconsistent, you need to show something that's replicable.
Salman, well, okay, I've got another question on that. But isn't when Einstein did theory of relativity or like physics back in like 1900 or whatever, they thought also that they had accounted for all of the laws, the physical laws, no?
No, because there was the problem of what's called black body radiation, which was the big thing that was unaccounted for.
So you're telling me that there is a 0% chance, or that there is a 0% chance that nothing has been unaccounted for with quantum with the way that physics are now.
There is a 0% chance that the laws that the physical laws that underlie chemistry are not known. Yes, that's correct. We already know that. It's called quantum electrodynamics, QED for short. That is the thing that underlies all of chemistry.
But okay, so then I get back to the question of you. So you say, or your claim is that there's no scientific evidence for miracles, but
Yep.
if people see them, and it's documented, and why, where would, I guess, what would be sufficient? Is your claim that miracles are not, like, don't exist, or like what is your claim regarding like what evidence would be sufficient then?
Something replicable.
But by definition, therefore, miracle is not replicable because it's out of the ordinary.
Lots of things are out of the ordinary. The definition of ordinary is up to us.
Okay,
my point is, you need to show me something.
You know what he meant, though.
But okay, so I'll try to be fair. I'm actually not trying to bash a straw man. I told you this is a 40-year argument. The point is this. If you want me to believe in something that's a miracle, show me something that's clearly contrary to the laws of physics that occurs. And I'll give you my example in the book is my favorite example because it's so easy to do for a creator, right? And that is, take all the air on top of the Sahara on say Tuesday and move it away and then put it back on Wednesday. That one example, just that one example, I made it up myself, would absolutely 100% convince me there is a creator. How's that?
But that would presuppose that the creator wanted to convince you.
Sure.
Not interesting for the creators.
Maybe so. Maybe so. I want something that is in fact completely contrary to the laws of physics. If you find me something like that, I will look at it and I will actually be willing to change my mind.
Look, I mean, here's sort of, look, I mean, we can go down various arguments, but I think one I think is where Eric was getting at, that
okay,
that there is which is Kant's argument. I think I'm not an expert in Kant, but basically that religion and following religion results in a more moral society. A more moral society, the absence of religion would not have it, and therefore a more moral society is in and of itself a good, and therefore God must exist. Now there's a big leap between the third point and the final point. Or Descartes saying, I perceive God, therefore God must exist, which is kind of what I perceive God. You cannot convince me that I don't perceive God, because when I meditate or pray, my state of consciousness improves. I'm more acute. I'm more aware of my surroundings and closer to whatever the ultimate reality is.
But I'm not sure that proves anything, Salman, because that's a change in your brain state. And if it makes a good positive change in your brain state, I'm all for it. I think that's fantastic. Do more of it. But it's not clear to me that it proves anything.
So Yes, yes, of course. It doesn't prove anything to you because you don't experience it. But so like, what, okay, let's hypothetically, if Salman is meditating and we stick up like a brain, like electro reader thing, machine to him and different brain activities show up, like, are you, like, where, like, so my understanding of what you're saying is that there's no proof for any of the things, therefore it doesn't exist. Is that true?
No,
Or
my
no
statement
sufficient
is
proof for you?
none of this is inconsistent with the known laws of physics.
None of what is inconsistent, exactly.
Everything you're saying, none of it, both of you, none of what both of you are saying is inconsistent with the laws of physics. So I don't have to believe that there's something other than the laws of physics yet. You're going to have to show me something inconsistent with the laws of physics for me to change my mind on that statement. That's what I'm trying to get at. And it's a strange way of talking, but there's no other way of saying it because you can never prove a negative, you see. So the statement from a physicist would be these laws of physics are here, we've tested them. As best we can tell, this is in fact the set of laws that underlies all of chemistry and therefore all of biology. And we have not yet found anything that will tell us that we are wrong.
I'm Googling miracles, someone.
I love it. That's great. It's
Okay, so
fabulous.
so obviously, so the obvious example, at least for Catholics, or of course, is the resurrection. But aside from that, for like you've got the turning water into wine and all these things. So, like, I would be willing to take on the. This is where I brought up the literal truth versus medical metaphorical truth from earlier. I'd be willing to
Sure.
take on that or take on the right because I wasn't there and neither were you and neither were you, and so I would be willing to take on kind of the okay, it's a metaphorical truth argument rather than a literal one, but the accounts of people kind of whether it's at the wedding in Cana where he turned the water into wine, like the accounts are there that say he did that occurred, and so is there a way with physics that you can turn water into wine in 30 seconds?
Trivially, because the issue is a question of how the story was reported, who reported it, how much training they had on their observations, and whether it's myth or reality anyway. But sure, I mean, if you watch a magic show, you can
Well,
see people do all kinds of things.
right,
How
but
do we
my
know that's
so
not what happened?
let's say for the sake of the discussion that the
Okay.
reporting is accurate.
But again, what define accurate?
It water turned into wine
Automatically, in and of itself,
as reported
as reported,
in the
exactly
Bible.
as reported.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a container that contained water. No other force influenced it except that some guy said turn into wine and it did.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well then in that case, that's contrary to the laws of physics. Sure.
So I've ah how did we end up at an impasse only 37 minutes in? Um
But you
so
see, the problem is A, that's not replicable.
mhm.
It's never been seen again. B, it's not the sort of observation that would cause a scientist to change their mind. And the reason is that the number of possibilities of error there is gigantic. What you want is something that is just simply incontrovertible. Yes, okay, got it. That's just not consistent. That's what I'm getting at. That's what an inconsistency is.
Okay, I'm
It,
Googling miracles from this century. Salman, all you, man.
No, I mean, look, I think the uh, and this is sort of, I mean, I have direct evidence of this happening, right? I mean, there's like this saint that exists in Monica's family, and she's very friendly with a gay couple, but one of them is very spiritual, and he was visiting, and mother was very, very, very upset because she's saying like, I when I saw him last time, and she sees him because she's very close to this saint. He was very upset at me and so on and so forth. And I didn't, so this medium, right? He's not Hindu. He's not particularly religious, but he does exist on a spiritual plane. He comes into the room And this is being described by a lot of people and that people I know, they didn't make it up. And their perception was, he said, look, and his hair was standing on end. And Monica said, well, should I turn the AC down, right? Are you cold? He said, no, 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 no. I'm seeing this man in a bandana, like he described this man. And he's saying to tell your mother that she should not be upset. I'm not upset at her. And then he said, look, I mean, then after a while, he said, look, I'm getting very uncomfortable because the room is filling up with spirits, people. I need to leave. So look, there is evidence that there is some sort of communication which is not explainable from the laws of physics. I mean, my mother would get some sense if I was in trouble, and she would call me. So there's a connection there that I mean, you can't explain it. She lives 5,000 miles away. How is there a connection that sort of exists in a dimension that we don't yet understand?
That sounds to me like something that could be explained via simply stating coincidence.
But
I mean, there are a lot of people that have called you. Sure, anything. That's right, exactly. That's why the rule for scientific evidence is that it needs to be replicable. Exactly.
Okay, so
it's
okay,
applicable because
here,
it happened more than once.
so here's
It's not. Go ahead.
it happened more than once also, but there's this guy named John Burke who's done a bunch of research into near death experiences. And all these people seem to experience the same thing. They all say they experience some like a feeling of warmth and love and the things that, and so that to me is replicable, right? Gotten hundreds or however many amount of like testimonies and done the research, and that seems replicable from the standpoint of
Sure.
like this
So
has been repeated in the same um, or similar outcomes, similar enough, we'll say outcomes. And then, so I would say, what is the explanation? But for that, like, there's lots of stuff that go on within the human kind of psyche in terms of um, spirituality, or like you just get a feeling of whatever, and how like these things. So just you just getting a feeling, not necessarily is religious related, but like there's lots of things like that where you get like, what do you call like getting a hunch or something along those. You just end up with like, oh, I feel I should do this, and then it turns out that if you didn't go to the World Trade Center that day, that was 9/11. Like those sorts of things. Like, how do you explain those? Because the stories are there in terms of replicable. Like, you can't replicate them because you can't go back in time to that day and say, you know what, I'm not going to get in the car that day, and there's a pile up on the highway. But like, it's impossible to replicate. But at the same time, there's so many of the stories. Like, you've probably experienced that as well in your own life. So like, what is your explanation for that?
look, the two things. First, I'm going to give you an unsatisfactory answer, which is the true answer, and then I'm going to give you, I hope, a more satisfactory answer that's false.
Okay.
So the unsatisfactory answer is that in fact there's nothing inconsistent between that and the laws of physics. Because the laws of physics are simply telling you how particles move. It's not telling you what happens to a brain state when it's under conditions of hypoxia, for example, when you're dying, or under whatever other stress condition those things happen to be. And not surprising to me is that the brain shuts down, that less and less of it is active, and so more people's experiences are more and more common. That I don't find that terribly surprising. That's the first thing. I think that's actually the more correct answer, even though it's less satisfactory. I think the less satisfactory answer, which is the one that people like to say, not that it's false, but it's less satisfactory, is that a lot of it is in fact simply that lots of unusual things happen constantly, because there are always lots of things happening. It's just that the ones we pay attention to are the ones that we pick out of all the things that are happening, and then we say, explain that. But there's lots of other things that might have been happening, or could have been happening, or could have happened. And it's a little bit of an error to ask for an explanation of that particular thing, because unless and until, as I said, you can go back and do quantum field theory on 10 to the 27 particles per person, plus all the particles impinging upon them over the period of time of the calculation, you can't make any predictions. So at the end of the day, that's not to me evidence of much of anything other than some coincidence happened.
So, okay, what was the thing you said about the state of the brain in near-death experiences?
So, in a near death experience, what should or probably is happening, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I suspect this, I'm pretty sure this is right. Different parts of the brain are probably going to be starved of oxygen. Different parts of the brain are probably shutting down. Different parts of the brain are having a change in your blood flow. Different parts of the brain are probably having some change in the way various chemicals are being expressed by the nerve synapses and so on and so forth. And I don't find it at all surprising that the result of that is that your brain is not functioning in a normal way. And so the output of the brain, which is what you're perceiving, is not normal. And since the amount of the brain that's going to be active in that situation is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and I suspect in the same way with most people, because we've all evolved the same way, it's not surprising to me that we all have something approaching a similar experience. I don't find that at all convincing of anything, honestly.
But there's a spiritual aspect that everybody who has the testimony can like
Sure,
ascribes to that. So like
sure. But
then
that doesn't
is
tell
that
you the laws of
still
physics are false.
I was gonna say, so is that still laws of physics then?
Sure, why not? Because your brain is still operating according to the laws of physics. What I'm saying, see, here's another way you can
Right.
convince me. Give me a brain state that is not explicable by the laws of physics, which we can see, say, in an fMRI machine. That would convince me.
Go ahead,
Look,
someone.
but by definition, every brain state is going to be explainable. The question is, why does certain of your actions lead to certain brain states that make you feel good? And yes, you'll say chemistry, but that chemistry is being driven by either following a moral code or going through inward-looking spirituality. In extreme cases, when the prophets or messengers went through that extreme process of spirituality, a lot of time in deserts, they ended up, perceiving a superior entity. We have seen that over and over again, and
Sure.
it is consistent with the historical texts
Yes.
that have been written. So, not sure that you can just dismiss all that, right? As I'm not sure that I would dismiss the laws of physics either, but I'm just saying that there is a possibility that those states existed, that, you know, Jesus didn't make up the Sermon on the Mount, Moses didn't make up the Ten Commandments, Muhammad didn't make up the Quran, right? It's possible.
I never said that they made them up. My question to you is whether or not what they said is or isn't the outcome of a physical process. That's what I'm getting at.
No,
So I have no problem with saying Muhammad said X, Moses said Y, and Jesus said Z. That's completely cool with me. And spirituality is completely cool with me too. I get it. That's just a change in your brain state. But where is the physics not being there? That's what I'm asking you guys. That's my question.
okay, well then physics is, if that's the case, then physics is not necessarily inconsistent with religion, right? Because what we're saying is that brain state resulted in laws or a way of living life, which in and of itself is, at least in my opinion, ideologically better, right? Because all these laws have consistency, which is morality and do good and follow some sort of a moral code, which is don't harm, versus what we came up with the Marx Engels construct of a totalitarian state that ultimately was done by a madman who killed 35 million people. Uh,
Um, so if you're saying the statement is that it leads to a better life and it leads to a better morality and so on, I again don't have a problem with that. My question is slightly different. My question is whether you believe in a creator that intervenes in human affairs, or you believe in a creator that simply, say,
I
put the
mean, we
world
don't
into
like
motion and stayed out.
the this there is this concept of, you will talk to them and they will say, show me, but I am hidden. And I don't know if this exists in the Bible. It exists. These are verses from the Quran, and I maybe but uh, uh, Not, I'm interpreting them more metaphorically, but I am hidden and I cannot be seen. You believe in me because even if you don't see me, they will insist on seeing me. Tell them you have your religion, I have mine. So the Quran actually presupposes an impasse to this argument and says, don't try and convince.
But even that's cool. My question isn't even that. My question is whether that entity, assuming it exists, does or does not intervene in human affairs. If you tell me that it doesn't, then we're in perfect agreement. I have no problem with any of the statements you make. If you tell me that it does, then I say to you, fine, if you want to believe that, then you must logically and consistently believe that there is no free will. That's my statement.
Well, I mean, if you take the illusion, I mean, and help me out here because I'm out on a complete limb. But if all states of nature can exist in quantum physics, or do exist until you end up being in one state, right? I mean, it's a binomial. It's a binomial possibilities equation with not binomial but
Okay, fine, go ahead.
of a tree, right? What is to say that free will exists? This entity is not subject to mathematical irreducibility because its ability to compute is higher than ours.
That's fine. So if that's the case, then the question is whether that entity is letting the rules that it put forth propagate on their own, or whether every so often it changes the rules whenever it feels like it. Because if it is the latter, then honestly and consistently, by definition, you cannot say you have free will of any kind.
No,
because then everything that happens is the fault of the entity.
That all possibilities exist at any given time. I can do anything until I do something, right? Which is what quantum mechanics says, right? I mean, now it doesn't. Your point is it doesn't matter because if your other self is on the other node of the tree, you can never combine again.
Yes.
Right. But my point is that in certain instances, because of whatever, and it may be consistent with the laws of physics because this entity may have that power, I don't know. But this entity says, okay, Mr. Khan is going to today eat a lot of red meat, get drunk, and then try and go back to work tomorrow. And he's got this big board meeting coming, which is going to totally blow and is going to get into a downward spiral in his business and it's going to get destroyed.
Yes.
Mr. Khan is going to go work out. After that, he's going to sit and he's going to do spirituality or prayer. And in which case, the problems that are going to come up in the board meeting are going to go into his subconscious. And overnight, he's going to solve all his problems. And tomorrow, he's going to show up. And even though the problems seem immense, they're going to get solved. Both are possible. One became more probable because of the fact that I went through a process of prayer or meditation or taking the moral path.
Sure, but the question still remains: did the what you did with your meditation or prayer or thought, was it consistent with physical laws? Was your brain still operating consistently with physical laws? In which case you had free will in practice, or was it not? In which case your brain state was being affected by this other being, in which case, hey, whatever happened to you is the being's fault, not yours.
No, I don't think it's the being's fault, but I think that the being that
how can it be anything else, Salman?
Because you have, in my experience, you have the ability, you sort of at every point in that binomial, and I do think it's infinitesimally binomial because that's how I can perceive reality, right? At every point in life, you have a choice, and those choices are yours. If you choose the right path, every religion talks about the right path. Hey, God, show me the right path, the path of the people. It's in the Gayatri Mantra, and these are religions that are 3,000 years apart. The Gayatri Mantra and the prayer that we say every day is identical, which says, "Oh, superior being, show me the path of the people that have followed the right path and that you've shown enlightenment to. Do not show me the path that will lead me astray."
But define choice, Salman. I think you've elided the point. Because what I'm getting at is not that you're not choosing. What I'm saying to you is that your choice is consistent with physical law. And that is the nature of your free will, is that despite you don't know what that choice is going to be until you make it consistent with physical
All I'm
law.
saying is in that infinitesimal moment, if you are
Mhm.
in a state of closeness to God, your choices are going to be better. They're still your
That's
choices.
But you see, I'm asking. I don't disagree with you. I'm asking you a slightly different question. Were your choices? Was your brain still functioning under the laws of physics or not?
Yeah, but maybe there's a Higgs boson out there that is affecting the particles in my brain.
Well, but those are still laws of physics. So that's my question. That's what I'm trying to really drill down on. If your brain was still operating according to the laws of physics, that's one branch of my tree of yes no discussion, or it wasn't, in which case there was an outside entity which you may or may not be able to perceive that was affecting it. And you've
I
actually
think
hit
there's
the
an
crux of
outside
what I'm
that
getting at.
affects it. I do believe that.
Okay, so if you believe it affects it, your logical problem now is that if the being is affecting your state of mind,
Not
then that
always.
means, excuse me?
Not always.
Exactly, very good. But the being can always choose to affect your state of mind.
Right.
Okay, if the
It
being
transcends
can,
time and space, right?
fair enough.
And
So if the
that is
being can,
consistent with physics.
well, tricky, hold on. If the being can now affect your state of mind whenever it chooses, then it seems to me by definition your choices are not yours, they're the being's, because
I,
the being can
I,
affect them
I,
anytime it wants
I
to.
don't disagree with that because ultimately it's the moving finger writes and having written moves on, not that all that piety or wit, nor all that tears will lure it back to cancel half a line.
Okay, so very good. So in fact, this is really interesting. So what you're saying then really is that your choices are really the being's choices.
But I'm saying
No,
that
can
there
I?
is an interactive loop, right? There is an interactive loop. The being can choose to intervene or not.
But by
Wait,
not choosing to intervene,
wait,
it's
wait.
already made a choice.
No, yes and no, right? It's giving you these infinitesimal choices. It's allowing you to seek closeness to the being. It's asked you to do that in various forms of communication to you, which is very hard because the being is beyond our understanding. So initially, as we were evolving, it started with the pagan gods. Hey, we can't understand this, it must be God. And to where we're having a discussion around a metaphysical being, right? We have evolved as humans to the point we can have a discussion about a metaphysical being. So that being is choosing to intervene, but only choosing to intervene if you ask it to. So that's a choice on your part to say, hey, help me here. And I believe that whenever I say that, the reality based on the choices that I make, which is not going drinking and coming home hammered and not thinking about the issues that would come up at the board meeting, solving all those issues and basically be in a good place. All those things are a result of a conscious desire of me to whether you call it Kant's leading a good life, whatever that may have meant in the 17th century, or mine saying I want to be, or karma, like do good so that good will come to you. Ultimately, you may have to wait for it, but your actions ultimately will lead to a opposite reaction, right? I mean, if you do good, ultimately good will come to you, so maybe in a while. So all those concepts, I think, are in the extreme, right? Are manifestations of the being intervening. I'll give you an example, and I am my beliefs, right? I mean, as far as he's always said that my religion is not Islam, it's Salman. I mean, it's my perception of religion, and I'm spiritual rather than religious. But the same dude that Monica's mother is very close to. When I was starting to date her, and my wife is Hindu, right? So she's not Muslim. So um, I was traveling cross country and I would meditate and I would do deep meditation. And every time And there's a process. I read a book, I became good at it because it's a 6-hour flight. So I mean, at some point you want to read, you get bored, you meditate, and time passes. I mean, like time passes much more quickly than it does otherwise. Um, and in deep meditation, over and over again, the same person came to me and said, "Take care of her." And I'm like, okay, well, like the fourth or fifth time, I'm like, who the hell are you? I mean, like I'm a Muslim, I believe in God, and like this being says I'm Allah and disappears. I've never seen him again. But I thought that was a communication where, he knows that I was in, super search mode, having gone through a divorce, and here is the answers to this woman's prayers who's found me. And she's close enough to God, even though she doesn't pray, she's not very religious. Her whole communication with God in her mind is going to be, you know, hell, I haven't done anything wrong. I need a man in my life. Send me a man. So if I am that man, I'm being told you better behave. And that did it affect my choices? Would I have gone a different way otherwise? I don't know. But at least that happened to me. It doesn't like I don't have to go anywhere else for that perception.
But if you say that, Salman, it seems to me that logically you cannot say you have actual free will. Because if in fact there was a being that convinced you in some way to look after your current wife, who is lovely, by the way, then in that case, that was not in some sense your choice. And the second thing I would say to you, which I think, Eric, you were sort of hinting at this too, is that if you say to me, okay, well, I can choose to have this being come into my brain or not come into my brain, but the fact is the being has the capability of getting into anybody's brain. So if that's the case, then whatever happens in the world is the choice of the being to intervene or not intervene.
So
No,
there is no free will.
The answer
you're
to
gonna
that is little subtle in at least some of the story. I mean, it is saying that always, always stay close to me. Pray, remember me. So I think there is a feedback loop, right? I mean, it is a being that chooses to say, okay, this particular simulation can run forever on its own, and I'm not going to deal with it. This particular, I mean, I'm just saying simulation, but we are a
Sure.
collection of atoms. I mean,
Sure.
so this particular simulation is trying to ask for intervention, so I'm going to intervene, and I do think prayer has an effect on outcome.
Sure, it
I
has an
would
effect
also
on your brain state. But what I'm trying to say is if the being has the ability to intervene and chooses not to, then everything that happens in the universe is, in fact, at the end of the day, the being's doing,
so
not yours.
okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
So
Go.
I would concede that the word if the being is choosing to not intervene, therefore everything is the being's choice. Like fair enough. But I would argue that the default is that the creator does not intervene and wants its creations to live life according to their own free will and choices. And so by like English, yes, that's a choice that the creator doesn't intervene in everything. But I would also argue that that's not like because then you get into not like point gathering or whatever. But if the being chooses everything for us, then like what's the point? So
Yep.
so then if we have our own free will and we make our own choices, good or bad, then that kind of in terms of like when people ask like what's the point of life, it's like, well, if you're just living and you don't get to choose anything, then that's a pretty dismal existence. But I think that is fairly clear, like Salman mentioned, like stay close to me, pray, all these things, like build a relationship with God or the Creator, depending on the religious text that you are looking at that particular moment. So I don't think like in the words of English, Samir, that you are wrong, but I would say that in practice that I would say that you are wrong. But like
So I like that. So let me say this. That's beautifully put. Here's what's bothering me about that argument. Choosing to do nothing is a choice.
sure.
So that means that the ultimate responsibility for anything that you do is not yours. It's the
Well,
beings.
right, yes, yes. However, if it doesn't intervene, and so like if it doesn't intervene, are you just going to sit there and do nothing with your life? It's like, well, no, you're going to still make choices, and you still have the responsibility for your own choices that you make if there's no intervention. So it's not like all of a sudden you can go kill a bunch of people and then say, well, the being didn't intervene, so therefore it's not my fault.
Well,
You still
really,
did it.
strictly speaking, it isn't. I mean, the statement there is simply that the being could have chosen to stop you killing a bunch of people, and it
Sure.
chose not to, right? So whose responsibility is that at the end of the day? It can't possibly be yours.
Well, you still chose to make that action.
But
So
somebody
it's
else
so
chose
it's the
with
creator's,
ultimate power chose not to let you not to stop you.
but that's okay. So yes, but also you still chose to make the action. So you could say like if the default is that there's free will from the creator's perspective, the default is there's free will for the beings living. And then once in a while they intervene. If that's the default,
Well,
then
which free will though? Hold on a second. What kind? Is it consistent or not consistent with the laws of physics?
we'll say consistent with the laws of physics.
Okay, so that's free will in practice, as I called it.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll go
Okay,
with the free will
carry
in
on.
practice, and we won't
Good.
talk about
Okay.
miracles right now.
Good.
Um,
Okay.
but it's still on you to make those decisions. You might have influence from, right? Because then you like you get the analogy of like you got the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other one, and you got the influences. But at the end of the day, you still make the decision. And then the creator can intervene if he so chooses, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden that you are absolved of all responsibility. It's not like like then,
I
well, I
don't
don't know.
know. Are you sure? So, okay, here's the question. Um, Supposing that there's three people on the street,
Hmm.
one very weak person. I'm saying they're weak because I'm setting up a scenario,
Hmm.
and you're a big, strong person. Like if you're watching Reacher on Amazon Prime, you're Reacher, and there's some really weak, small person standing next to you with a gun,
Hmm.
and that person is about to shoot somebody else.
Hmm.
And you could, with no real danger to yourself, stop them shooting the other person.
Hmm.
Now, do you say it's that person's free will to shoot the other person, or do you stop them? And if
Both.
you don't stop them, are you not morally responsible for not stopping them?
Yes, you are, but also as both.
But
It's
my
like
point is that the ultimate
that person,
responsibility then is the
but
creator's, isn't it?
that person has the choice to shoot somebody. They're choosing to do that. They don't have to do that. And then you have the choice to stop them or not stop them.
Yes. But if you don't stop them, is it not your responsibility? The ultimate responsibility, isn't it yours if you could have stopped them easily at no cost to yourself?
No, I would argue the ultimate responsibility is the person pulling the trigger.
Hmm.
Because the person pulling the trigger then put that strong person into a scenario in which they had to make a decision to stop or not to stop them.
Yes.
So the scenario is the responsibility of the situation falls on the person that is going to pull the trigger in that scenario, to me.
That doesn't
And
seem
then
right somehow.
ultimately, look, I mean, the construct of the reacher construct is that, okay, well, we have to zoom out a little bit and say that person dying may or may not be in and of itself a bad thing, right? We don't know what, like, we don't necessarily, we give ourselves too much credit for being important in the universe, right?
Also true.
So it's like, okay, it's what there's let's say there's some version of God's plan, which is okay, ultimately I'm gonna just energize the Higgs boson to an energy state where it's just gonna collapse the whole universe, and then there'll be um, a reckoning of some sort where, okay, did you live your life morally or not? And if you did, you're one with the whole, and whatever that whole might be or not, because you're living in this constant state of regret, which oh, I could have done better. Um, So I think that ultimately, my view of the world is that if you if the process by which you are perceiving a state that makes you feel you're closer to God, I would use Descartes' argument that I perceive that state, therefore God must exist.
That's an argument to make yourself feel better about your beliefs. It's not an argument about what is and what isn't. You see, so that I'm right back to being a hardcore physicist again. There's nothing inconsistent between your beliefs and physics.
Salman, we almost got him out of the physics state and into asking philosophical questions. Look what you've done.
That doesn't solve the problem because you are, at the end of the day, a collection of atoms. And your perceptions are simply those atoms moving around, and your thoughts are electrons moving between synapses in your brain, roughly speaking. So there's nothing
At some
inconsistent
point, I
between that
mean,
and
look,
physics.
at some level of energy, we exist to be able to contemplate these things, right? So the argument that you have in your book is what's different between I would say that God says it exists everywhere, or he exists everywhere, and then and nowhere, which is kind of inconsistent, but it is what like it's an all-pervading entity that is in us. So if it's in us, the ultimate state of union is what would be when the universe no longer exists, right? So in the meantime, each being is depending upon its ability to perceive this ultimate entity is trying to get closer to it. Some succeed to the point where they can intervene in a living room where one of their very strong belief followers is feeling bad about themselves, or intervene with me saying, okay, well, I know what you're up to, and don't hurt this woman. And ultimately this process, not because of my prayer, in this case, because of hers. So I believe that whole process is a little more complicated, right? Unless you are strongly asking for intervention, intervention does not exist. And if you are strongly asking for intervention, there is a fat finger that comes in and throws down that tree and disrupts life. Now, even the first path of reality that without an intervention is impossible for us to compute according to your argument, then what is to say that these multiple paths of reality that we go through that intervention are not as hard for us or impossible for us to compute?
So the issue for me is slightly different. The issue for me is the following. If a fat finger comes down and changes the nature of reality now, and that fat finger can choose to come down anytime it wants to and change the nature of reality, then at the end of the day, the responsibility for the reality is that fat finger's. It's not even ours. It's no different than if we started pushing ants around. Would the ants be responsible for what they did? I don't see how they possibly could be held to be responsible for anything at all.
No, but
So this is
it's
my
looking
this
for
so
an
this argument I
interaction. Like,
find.
look, I mean, it's looking for an interaction and a process. It gives degrees of freedom to its to the rock, the insect,
But look at the word
the
you just
mammal to
used.
us, right?
Look at the word you just used.
What's
You
that?
used the word give.
Well, that presupposes that prior to the Big Bang, there was somebody that created the Big Bang.
Sure, but what I'm saying is that if that person can still intervene after the Big Bang,
Yeah,
right, whenever that person chooses, or entity, whatever you want to call it, then the ultimate responsibility for everything that happens in this universe is that entity's.
but you are presupposing that entity is maybe that entity is only intervening when certain sets of a certain set of
Yes,
behavior within the part of the of the create of the creations occur, and
but not choosing is also choosing, Salman.
but it is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, I told you, I gave you so many messages. You choose to ignore them. You choose to live your life along an amoral code. That life is going to end up with a set of circumstances, whether you call it karma or religion or hell or whatever it might be, that is not going to be good for you. And I've told you that over and over again. You choose to ignore me, that's yours.
But
That's
can I
what.
not stop you if I wanted to?
But why should I? It's a test.
Well,
It's a simulation.
well, okay, but that exactly. But you see, I think actually you're proving the point I'm making,
Okay,
even though
well, what if
you're not
okay,
agreeing with me.
what about this analogy? If you got kids at school and they're like 6 years old or whatever, you are responsible for them, like by and large, you're their guardian, legal guardian, parent, father, etc., etc. If your kid chooses to punch another kid and then gets in trouble, is that your fault for not stopping them?
I wasn't there and didn't have the ability to do so. But if I was standing next to my kid and I knew my kid was about to, or I could see that my kid was about to hit somebody and I chose not to stop them, yeah, I absolutely have responsibility.
But your kid still chose to do that.
Sure. But I chose to let them. So this
Let's
is,
say they're like standing over there, like, and you
then I
can't
didn't have
really
the,
see them.
then I didn't have the ability to stop them.
Well, that's
But
the
in this
thing.
case,
That goes back to the thing that Salman mentioned earlier, which is like, what was the verse about God being hidden or unseen or things like that? It's like he's not always just like toying with everything. So if he chooses to not
no,
intervene,
but so here's the problem. That leads to another problem. So the problem is we're saying God is outside of all current computation, right?
yes.
It's the right. So that means that it can always choose to intervene at any time it wants. It's not limited by its computing power.
Hmm.
So whenever it chooses not to intervene, it's actively chosen not to intervene. That's what I'm getting at. And so
That
my
means you're
argument,
presupposing not to intervene is a good thing, right? I mean, God saying,
no,
okay.
I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying the responsibility then falls on the non-intervener.
No, I don't agree with that argument. I think that,
Okay,
and neither does Eric. And so
I see that.
we'll try and explain it another way, right?
Okay, try.
Let's just go with the simulation process, right? So
Yep.
we are giving degrees of freedom. Um, let's say we're all living in a matrix, right? So we're giving degrees of freedom to the people within the matrix, and we only intervene if the people in the matrix act a certain way that we've told them to follow a certain set of rules. Now, some of them decide that they want to ignore those rules, even knowing that those rules are something that are innate in them. Like we've given them the ability to know whether it's angel or devil, right or wrong. I mean, all beings, at least conscious beings, some concept of consciousness, have that feeling of right or wrong. You know when you're doing something wrong, and then you do it, and then it becomes easier to do it the next time, right? I mean, if you talk to criminals, they say the first murder was the hardest, right? Because there was something stopping them. Then it becomes easier, and then becomes easier because they're further and further from the moral code that has been given to them. So therefore, if all of this is a test, and ultimately there is a reckoning, right? That will like we don't know that the person who died. I mean, that's why you do need the concept of eternity to create a universal sense of justice, right? Otherwise, the person who died didn't do anything wrong, whereas you let this person who didn't adhere to your set of rules um, just do them harm. So the point is that at least in there is a concept of saying that okay, this life is a test for you, and it is a very small part of your total existence. Ultimately, you're going to be in eternity. Eternity is a state of existence that is at one with God, and depending on how you act within this set of rules that I've given you, that you know about, even the person who's living in a remote Amazonian tribe has some sense of right or wrong. And if you choose not to pursue to um, adhere to them or to ask me for help when you need it, it is not on me to intervene. That's my construct of reality. And thereby the responsibility of each decision is on the person, as Eric and I both think. And the responsibility for intervention only occurs if the person going down the path of whatever these messages are, depending on the religion, chooses to try and get closer to God. where ultimately, at least in the case of some of the mystical states, you become God because you achieve nirvana or you achieve this fana, whatever this concept might be, that you have come, you sort of perceive God by becoming inside yourself so much that you are that entity then. There's no difference between you and that entity.
That's again, I don't have any significant problems with all of that, except that it's not very convincing. And the reason it's not very convincing is that you're not giving me any reason for why it's not the responsibility of the ultimate creator of all of this. If the ultimate creator has the ability to intervene and can do so and does do so whenever it
That's
wants to.
that's your construct, right? That's your construct. My construct is a little bit different. And yes, the ultimate creator has the ability to intervene. However, the ultimate creator has created this simulation, which is a very small part of total reality, as a test on how individual people that it has created, for whatever reason, just for humor, for example, right? Hey, I want to see what these bunch of ants do. If
But
I
then why intervene?
because some of them are asking you to help.
But you
Or
see,
some other set of
but
circumstances.
you see that's where I think, in my opinion, you have a logical inconsistency.
Why?
Because if you told me that this was a test, the creator wanted to run the test, and the outcome is whatever the outcome is, I'd say, you know what, that's perfectly cool. I don't agree with it, but I don't have any problem with it whatsoever. My problem comes with it when you say that the intervener the creator can intervene when it wants to, or is asked to, or whatever else it is. Because at that point it means that the intervener, I mean the whatever, the entity has the power to intervene.
But if we're in school and I'm the teacher and you're taking a test and you're getting every question wrong, I could go tell you to change all your answers and get 100%. But is that my fault that you didn't study and you got the questions wrong for not giving you a good grade? Or is that your
Um,
fault for answering the
I'm
questions wrong?
I'm not sure that's a good example, because the example you guys are giving me is the opposite, of having to do with people behaving morally and asking for help to behave morally and so on and so forth. So you would need to give me an example along those lines. And if you did, then I would say to you, yeah, because you could have stopped me from behaving immorally. You chose not to, which is fine. That's your choice.
But the
But
questions
then
on the
how is it my
test,
responsibility now?
but the questions on the test are the moral choices. That's the analogy.
Sure. But if, look, supposing I create both the person taking the test and the test that that person is taking,
Mm-hmm.
and I also retain the power to affect the behavior of that person,
Mm-hmm.
then at the end of the day, I don't see how that person has any choices that that person has on their own, because all of their choices are constrained by what I let them do
I mean, if
or
you,
not let them do.
yes, you're not intervening being a choice would then you're the way that you've worded it, I don't disagree with how you've worded it. Like, yeah, if the creator chooses not to intervene, then we don't have any choices because they could choose to intervene always in
Exactly.
every. But I'm saying in practice, I don't believe that that's how it would work. Like, do you like you go through life and you make choices? Do you not think that you still have some responsibility for the choices that you make? No? Do you not
Of
like do
course,
you
but I don't believe in any creator, right?
Right, but I'm saying Salman and I, okay, maybe Salman, I'm going to speak for you, but I hope that you feel responsibility for some of the choices that
Yeah,
you
of
make.
course.
But we feel responsibility for we believe that the creator could intervene whenever, but
Sure.
also we still feel a sense of responsibility for the choices that we make. And so I don't think that saying that just because the creator is choosing to not intervene, therefore means that we have no responsibility. And so, and
I
you
didn't
might,
say we have no
and you
responsibility.
might, well,
I
okay,
said you don't have free will.
ultimate response. Okay, sure, but
Yeah.
but I can still, I can get a nudging from the creator saying, hey, maybe you should do that or not, and I can still say, no, I'm not going to do that. It might not be a
But
good idea, but I
but the
could.
creator could give you an even stronger nudge, you see, and an even stronger nudge, and a still stronger nudge. and the creator could give other nudges to other parts of the rest of the universe to stop you from doing something that was bad.
In
It's up to the
so
creator.
in
Now,
in in like big picture, I don't really disagree. Like, I don't really disagree, but I think in practice, it's not. Oh,
I think your construct, the flaw in your construct is just the following, right? I mean, you're presupposing that not making moral choices is something is a universal good. I think that if it is set up as a test, then the only time the intervention in the test occurs is if somebody has perceived the rules that have been given to them to the point where they choose to ask for help. Otherwise, just keep it running. I don't care.
That's cool. I don't have a problem with that. I'm saying something, I guess, slightly different. What I'm saying is, if the ultimate responsibility for anything that happens in the universe is that of the person that created the universe, then it is not at all obvious to me how you can say that the ultimate responsibility is not the creator's. So yes, you can feel you have free will, just like I feel I have free will under the laws of physics. But in this particular case, now we're talking about things happening that are not consistent with the laws of physics, presumably. And
But laws of physics, as we perceive them, as of now.
well,
and
that's
now we go
another.
back to miracles,
I will
guys.
go back to miracles again. But the fact still remains. If somebody chooses to do nothing, it seems to me that that's that person's now responsibility. That's that legal theory too, right? The bystander theory. If you could have prevented something without any harm to yourself, then you had a duty to act. So,
Yeah.
I don't say that you don't have responsibility, Eric, if you go out and shoot somebody.
Mm-hmm.
What I say is that yours is not the ultimate responsibility. It's the difference between the proximate cause and the ultimate cause, if you wish. I'm arguing ultimate cause, you're arguing proximate cause.
Well, I guess I don't really disagree with that either. To someone's point about we're not really that important in the grand scale of the universe, I would say that the responsibility that the three of us share in our own daily lives pales in comparison to the. So it's like, to me, it's not really a comparable, like yeah, the creator will have ultimate responsibility because they created the whole universe, but like that comparison of saying like, okay, well, like it doesn't do me any good to say, well, the creator has ultimate responsibility, therefore I can just do whatever I want down here because I know that if I did a wrong thing, I'll feel a certain way or there will be certain consequences for those
Sure.
actions. And so the comparison of level of responsibility to me, like again, like I don't disagree with like maybe the creator has ultimate responsibility, but like the comparison of responsibility from the creator to you or to me or to someone, like it doesn't seem to be like relevant in like daily life almost. And so I don't know. I I don't know. I guess we've kind of come in a full circle. Do you guys have sort of closing remarks? I feel like we would, if we started right now, we would have the exact same conversation again, and it would still come back to miracles and who believes in them and who doesn't.
Yes, I
Um,
think that's right.
Sabir, I'll start with you. Have closing kind of or a response to what I just said, and then a kind of closing remarks.
My only quick closing remark is only one statement, and that is either the laws of physics exist, in which case they exist everywhere and at all time, or they don't. That is to say, they don't exist everywhere and at all time, and it takes just a single exception. And my argument is only that in the ultimate cosmic scheme of things, it's the existence of the laws of physics that gives you your free will. And if you believe that those laws of physics can be violated, then what I'm saying is that the thing that violates it is in fact the thing that bears ultimate responsibility for what happens, as opposed to you. You still bear proximate responsibility, you do not bear ultimate responsibility. That's
And
my
then,
closing statement.
do you have things that you want to plug the book? Go to tell people about the book and where to find
Yes,
all that
thank
stuff.
you. Yes, so the book is called The Science of Free Will, and actually the bulk of the book is not about this topic, even though this is part of what the book is about. There's all kinds of other things about it. I talk about, for example, dolphins saving humans. So that's an example of universal morality. I talk about the future of artificial intelligence. I talk about whether AIs can have free will. I talk about whether AIs will need to have free will to be most efficient for us. And I discuss all sorts of other interesting questions, such as how small a minimal computer can be and still be a universal computer. I talk about things called cellular automata. There's a lot of stuff in the book. And this particular argument today, I hope, just simply whets your appetite for the rest of what's in the book.
Yeah, and the
And you
book
can see it over my shoulder.
the book is a brain hurt. It took me like 5 times to read every chapter. Need to make sure I digest it. Salman, closing remarks or anything that you want to plug or tell people where to go find your work or support what you're doing?
No, I mean, look, I think this was just to continue an argument that we've had for many, many years. So I welcome people's thoughts. I think Samir is an incredibly smart guy, and I would actually plug his book as well because I actually enjoyed it a lot, having discussed a lot of these arguments over somewhat to the consternation of each of our everybody else in the room because they're just going down a path and I don't know where this is going to end. But ultimately, I mean, it's what I would end it on the topic of what your topic is today, which is religion and free will, is kind of what we discussed. I do think that there is a need for a moral code. That moral code has been somewhat embedded in us and then communicated to us over time, and that pursuing that moral code is a good in and of itself, but deviations from the moral code, I don't feel that there is an intervention immediately, but ultimately there is an intervention of some sort where, I mean, how do you explain if you call Nazi Germany as being a bad set of people, it's pretty easy to define that way. How do you explain a little island in the middle of the Atlantic to be the only one standing up to them until we ultimately, with America's help, defeated this evil empire? So I do think that things happen, and they happen. They take time. And I'm optimistic because of that. I'm a better person because I believe in it. And maybe he's right, and we are all in this self-delusional state, but I'd rather be in the self-delusional state than the alternative.
That's a great way. That's a great way to wrap it up. For those listening, yeah, please let us know your thoughts in the comments. And the link to Samir's book, of course, will be in the description as always. Thank you both for your time, and for those listening, thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye.
Fabulous. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.